How did your experience at Stanford and Harvard Business School shape your approach to building an AI company?
Yeah, I would say kind of two things I feel like really appreciative, right? One is
In what ways has your experience as an investor shaped your leadership approach as a CEO?
that's a very interesting question. I think kind of maybe one thing.
Welcome to Life Science Insight Podcast. I'm your host Sandal Karnanidhi. Today, I'm excited to welcome Levi Lian, CEO and founder of Raycaster, a company focused on using AI to solve the challenge of complex documents. Levi brings a unique blend of technology and business insight as a Stanford graduate and Harvard Business School MBA. And he is also an active and angel investor supporting innovative startups. In this episode, we'll explore how AI is transforming the way enterprise manage and understand complex documentation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Can you start by telling us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sounds great. So I'm Levi. Thanks for kind of the intro, founder and CEO of Raycaster. And what we do is we build AI for complex documents for, at this point, a variety of industries, right? Life sciences, energy, and expanding to more. And so think of us as like if you know the company like Harvey, right? Legora, right? In the legal world, we are kind of a domain-specific AI before biopharma and a lot of the regulated industries where documents are the product. And so my background, and as you mentioned, kind of I did my undergrad at Stanford in computer science, and then went over to Harvard Business School. Actually, I like ended up taking a leave of absence to kind of pursue the entrepreneurship. And really in between, I worked on a variety of product and engineering roles at companies like Uber, Intuit, right? Some of the more well-known ones, and also at a smaller startup that was back in, I think kind of no one was focusing on like maybe the early waves of AI, right? It was later on acquired by Zoom into part of their AI chatbots. So I kind of was an early engineer there and kind of built a lot of the applications on integrating AI into the mobile experience. And so kind of really throughout my career, like one thing that's stood out consistently is how really just with each wave of technology, right? I think maybe the early 2000s, it was like cloud computing, right? With kind of maybe before that bringing the internet to the general masses and then cloud computing. And then you have some versions of an AI, let's say, to help with like recommendation systems, right? That's kind of, you've seen the rise of maybe consumer applications like TikTok, right? A bunch of the other ones. And now we're at this point of large language models and really seeing kind of how each wave creates new opportunities, right? And also new jobs, new roles that didn't exist before, right? For example, data science wasn't really a thing until the last decades. And now like AI engineers, right? Which wasn't really like there was only either you work in research, right? You're developing models or novel methods, or you're just software engineer, right? There is kind of the role of AI engineer that's kind of more popularized these days by how to build agents, how to build things on top of these large language models, and really kind of seeing this transformative force, right? Like made me even more excited about the work we do at Raycaster, which is helping kind of the everyday people, right, who work in an office, maybe working with documents. They're not necessarily developers. How to help them, right, leverage AI to the best of their ability and do the best work possible. So I just kind of pause here and yeah, let you take over.
Sure, okay. I read that you were raised in a four-generation medical family. Could you explain what that means?
Yeah, so now that you kind of mentioned it, right, we're kind of going back to the story of how I started Raycaster. Both of my parents and my grandparents, they're like medical doctors, and also even my great grandparents, right? And so really kind of growing up in this family, medicine's just such a big part of even the dinner table conversations, right? We would talk about innovative therapies. we will send each other articles from a young age that are basically backed by like science, right? Like Nature papers or some other research they saw online that's pretty exciting. And so really growing up in this household, I would say like medicine, right, or like more healthcare in general, just that's something I grew up with. But then I kind of decided to take a different path, right, to pursue computer science, focus on engineering for majority of my career,
Okay.
Until I kind of realized there's just so much innovation, right, that still need to happen in medicine for us to advance this field. And you could argue, right, like a lot of the other fields, they are getting a lot of technology, they're getting a lot of digitalization. But for example, in drug development world, right, even a lot of records are still paper backed, like batch records, right? For example, or even in the hospital system, right, when you're running clinical trials, all the binders are in the paper form, right? Like even the e-rec, right, like kind of moving a lot of the data and sources and materials to the internet. That's basically just been accelerated by COVID, right? So imagine almost like if this thing didn't happen, right, we would still be dealing with a lot of these manual paperback systems. So kind of that really made me realize like now is the time, right, to apply a lot of these innovative technologies that we've seen that have worked in other industries to this sector, life sciences, which is super critical, right, to getting therapies, innovative therapies to patients faster.
Okay. So while you're building the Raycaster, why do you focus on complex documents?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say complex documents, that's kind of more of a high level framing that we've like arrived at relatively recently, right? So initially we started with focusing on AI for life sciences.
Okay.
And when we kind of dug into the life sciences, we realized anything from maybe even like pre-discovery or discovery process to like your later on kind of manufacturing, actual development, or to like labeling to actual commercial strategy, right? Like how do you market in different markets around the world? One thing that's constant, right? You could say, okay, there's bench work, right? People need to do the wet lab, people need to do different experiments, but documents are still at the core of each step, right? It basically, you can say it's the IP of the company. It's the core assets that every biotech company hold on to, right? That's why security is so important. That's why if you talk to any kind of maybe biotech execs, right, they're a little bit wary of AI. They're like, we don't want people to put documents into ChatGPT, right? Because it's not secure and there's no way we can guarantee, right, the data doesn't leak, right? It's so important to their it's their lifeblood. So kind of the AI for complex documents, it's more of a recent framing. And then when we look broader, you realize it's not just life sciences, right, that kind of deal with the same problems, the paying of how do I make sure the documents are in sync, right? If I change something maybe in the batch record, if I update some values, so many other things need to update, right? Maybe even I need to file a post-approval change, right, to different agencies that we deal with, the FDA or Health Canada or EMA. The same problem happens in other kind of complex regulated industries as well, right? So I kind of mentioned some of the new areas we're expanding into, for example, energy world, right, where people are building new like manufacturing for, let's say, data centers, right, or a new project. You have to ensure things are compliant, right, with the different standards, right, whether it's like the ISO international standards or like NACE, right, which is their kind of standards in the industry. The same problem really happens across kind of, basically the entire world's most important industries.
Right.
And complex document is at the core, right? Everyone you talk to, they're either producing documents or reviewing them, right?
That's true.
And
That's true.
the same thing, right? Life sciences, you kind of everyone's working on a submission, right, for some kind of agency to give you a response, and then you kind of communicate in that way. Maybe there are kind of audits, right? There are different checks, different, but really the company operates around different kinds of documents.
Okay. That's true. How did your experience at Stanford and Harvard Business School shape your approach to building a AI company?
Yeah, I would say kind of two things I feel like really appreciative, right? One is um, kind of the notion that everything is possible. Like a lot of people in AI, especially on the customer side, I would say like they operate maybe in a more kind of constrained, confined industry, right?
Mm.
Like just because they have to. Every day they're thinking about what is compliant, how do we interpret the new regulation that's coming out, right? It's more of a, you could say, I don't know if it's the right word, like more reactive process.
Okay.
But what Stanford and I would say Harvard, they kind of teach you is this idea that anything is possible. So what that means is instead of thinking about whether we can use this AI technology for, let's say, document review, or can we use it for, let's say, is it going to work on complex handwritten PDFs? Right. If I scan this PDF, or maybe this PDF was from the company's repository from 30 years ago, right, in the 90s, can it still work? Instead
Mm.
of asking that question, you ask the question of how can we make this work?
Okay.
And I say that's kind of, one big lesson, right, I learned at these kind of two prestigious institutions is about always thinking about how, not why, like, whether we can do this. And so we apply the same kind of thinking to building an AI native company, because a lot of times you're making things for the first time, right? No one knew if it's going to work, but you
Correct.
just have to believe it's going to work. The difference is you can figure out how, right? Like anything is possible by that definition.
Okay. Okay. It's a great experience. What challenge do enterprise face today in managing complex documentation?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a great question. Like maybe we can use biopharma, right? Like since it's on a life sciences podcast to specifically focus on what kind of challenges they face today. So I think one big part is today they're doing a lot of things manually, and it's a lot more process driven where they're throwing big pharma, they're throwing people at the problem,
Mhm.
and your smaller like even your like publicly traded biotech companies, right?
Mm.
They don't even have the bandwidth to
Mm.
deal with, okay, what documents are we missing, right? What
Mm.
values are inconsistent, right? Maybe different kind of COAs have different values, or maybe even the SOP, right? Like some of the things are out of spec, and what needs to be rewritten, right? These are still managed in a very ad hoc fashion, right? Basically, people have to go into the system, read the documents, and read some source materials to understand what's going on. And if these people say they leave the company, the whole context is lost, right? They have to bring someone new and teach them how this process works,
Mm.
and how to do certain things.
Okay.
And this is why, like you've seen, like in life sciences, people like they're kind of Viva experts, right? Or like IQVIA experts. Like they manage these systems. They have to know the ins and outs, right?
Correct.
Because it's so complex. They have to do that. And also why biopharma companies pay them so much, right? To kind of maintain this type of software. Yet, right, at the same time, on the other hand, you see, despite throwing people at the problem, right, despite kind of adding more processes, right, a large pharma, you talk to anyone who's worked there, they tell you like there is a labyrinth of review chain, right? Like document A, right, needs to send to a different reviewer for different kind of process. Still, like we've seen the statistics, right? Like there are like just more kind of the kind of um the CRLs, right? Kind of the response letters being sent out, right, on kind of whether it's manufacturing processes, whether it's kind of your document inconsistencies, and you also see protocol amendments being more common than ever, right? Like I think the
Correct.
number is 3 and 4 protocols see at least one amendment, right? It's average like 3 per study, and almost half are actually avoidable mistakes.
Mm.
And each amendment, right, like they cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars and adds like weeks or months to the timeline, which is really what's kind of driving the kind of biopharma, let's say funding or any other milestone they set for themselves. And so that's kind of what you see, right? Like on one hand, they're throwing people at the problem. On the other hand, it's still not being solved, right? It kind of it begs the question of like, okay, if more humans don't solve the problem, then like, what do we do? So I think kind of it naturally leads us down the path of we need to rely on technology, right? To enable humans to do better work for this critical function of document generation and review.
Okay, good to know. What makes complex documents uniquely difficult for traditional automation tools?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, right? Kind of brings up a couple key points that I've seen kind of our customers or even prospects, right? Like anyone curious about it in the product, right? They can ask about why can we do this today? I think you naturally kind of found there are a couple big challenges. One is that the documents we're talking about today, they're really complex. So I think to like define what complex means, it means you're doing cross references across maybe hundreds of thousands of documents, right? Maybe let's say the tech transfer pack, right? Like that feeds your batch records, right? When you work with kind of different vendors, and the batch records, they can generate the deviations, right? Maybe your CAPA reports, and these roll into your like PPQ, CPV, and stability reports, right? And ultimately, you want to produce the module 3, right, for the submission. So one broken process in this kind of chain of documents means a lot of rework and even regulatory friction you need to deal with later on down the line. So that's one, the cross-reference. And two is that not all the documents are in like machine readable formats. So in the computer science world, right, there's a concept called like machine readable documents, which means it's all like line-based text format, which let's say your computer, they can read like I mean quote unquote read, like basically they don't have real understanding, but they can see what's on your screen. Whereas for PDF or maybe for Word documents or for like an Excel spreadsheet, these are created by like Adobe and Microsoft, right? Like these are kind of software giants that had created this new document formats to basically kind of like let people use their software, right? Whether it's like the PDF reader or like your Office suites, and Google has their own kind of Google Docs. So these are actually not machine readable. So if you have something, let's say you scan like a paper binder from kind of the clinical trial into some kind of PDF, machines cannot understand it. So traditionally, what you have to do is you use this process called OCR, right? Which is basically extracting the words that's legible from this handwritten notes onto the human readable, the computer readable version, the machine readable version. And that itself is a complex engineering project, right? Because it would like let you figure out, okay, what if there are errors? How can we trust the system, right? And so that's kind of another thing, which is that not all documents can actually be fed or automated through any kind of the process you built. And third is really that a lot of the work that we need to do today requires a deep understanding of the domain, right? Let's say I talk about in energy world, right? They may have like NACE, right? Or like API, whatever guidance for their coding or different procedures. And in the biopharma world, this is your ICH guidance, right? Your FDA, right? Which sometimes they're even like different from each other, right? How do you resolve these differences? The documents you generate or review, they have to be checked against these guidance. And there are also maybe internal guidance that you have, which machines still need to kind of apply the meaning to understand. So traditionally, keyword matching, if you just want to look for the keywords, like they don't really work, right? They just fail. So because of all these challenges, right, there are even more. Let's say you need to make sure the version control is there, right? Every version is auditable, right? Like because of all the different regulations you have with 21, like CFR Part 11, right? That's more on how do you ensure the digital kind of signatures you have are actually validated, right? The electronic records can be trusted. Like all these different processes mean you need to build a lot of layers on compliance and audit history on top of the document work that you're doing today. And this is another sign why like Viva and any of the kind of storage system, right? Fundamentally, they're only storing your documents. They're worth so much money. That's because this is really hard to build, right? For anyone just to build by themselves. They're kind of almost makes sense for a third-party company to be the provider of document storage solution. And so like all these are challenging to a point which makes the traditional automation tools just fall flat, right? They don't work. And people, only the big pharma have maybe even the capital or even the manpower to invest in some of the resources.
Okay. But how does AI move beyond OCR and basic extraction in the true document intelligence?
So in terms of kind of how AI exactly works on that layer, right? Like today, there are basically three approaches. So on the model layer, we've seen people use this thing called like multi-model large language models. So multi-model LLMs. Essentially, these are AI models that can ingest, let's say, PDFs or an image or a video, right? Any kind of the formats that's not text, right, into the AI model. And they would output, right, some kind of meaning still in text format, right, to explain, okay, this video, right, let's say there's a cat maybe catching a fish, right? It can explain in the image, we have maybe this kind of Venn diagram of, let's say, different components, or maybe there's a flow chart, right? I think kind of in biopharma world, there's a lot of kind of flow process kind of charts, right, that showcase the different steps for manufacturing process. So you can use the model's capability to basically ingest these documents.
Okay.
So that's approach number one. And number two is basically saying we can build actually specialized models that only focus on one task really, really well. Right? Let's say we can turn all the handwritten notes into, let's say, extractive values in a table almost with perfect precision, right? Even kind of handwritten, kind of, even if you have bad handwriting, right? We can still try to understand what you wrote there, right? It requires a lot of kind of analysis and reasoning, and maybe even on historical documents that you have to figure out, okay, we're talking about the same reviewer, right? Here, they signed their signature. So we're kind of turning their signature into like the actually machine readable formats. So that's kind of step number two. And that's kind of the method number two. And the third version of how like AI kind of is able to move beyond the simple OCR basic extraction into true document intelligence is saying, like, let's just give AI the capability to navigate our entire workspace. So the workspace could be like your SharePoint, your laptop, right? Different systems. And then say, I see here we have three validated batch records, right? Or like executed batch records. And let me read it. So almost like giving AI the power to choose whether it uses some specialized tool or maybe it uses coding, right? Like it can actually write codes to solve this problem, because maybe some documents they're in the some kind of code manipulatable format, right? Let's say for Word documents, a lot of these is basically written in like coding language, right? Let's call it like XML. Like Microsoft kind of produced this system. So you can actually parse it by writing codes to analyze your Word document and have AI analyze it. So the third approach is basically what we've done at Raycaster, right? We've taken the model capabilities of the large language models and give them different tools and even smaller specialized models to be the best at OCR extraction or maybe at different semantic analysis. And lastly is giving them the capability just to navigate the system, to navigate the workspace, just like a human, right? Like you would click on different documents your colleagues send you, right? Maybe open the email to check the context and understand like their meaning, and maybe also search online, search on internet to see what's available, right? You would do all these actions just to maybe validate or review some documents. And so it's the same thing here. We are adding that kind of system of intelligence, right, on top of the existing systems to make them aware of the actual meanings, which produces the document intelligence you need for any kind of document review or generation or editing.
Interesting. What industries benefit most from AI-driven document understanding?
So today we've seen like one big use case where we mentioned is life sciences.
Life sciences.
Yeah. And this is because really, I would say maybe after kind of the, and even as you're doing kind of the trial side, right, you may need to adjust certain things, right? Maybe p-values, right? There is a lot of complexities that's going to be maybe more like biostatistics, right? Maybe the early actual discovery, you can use a lot of, let's say, understanding the protein structure, right, molecular structure, do a lot of interesting things there. But still, right, you're dealing with documents, right? Things that any kind of trained scientist can come in and share their opinions, right? Whether it's for tech transfer or CMC or regulatory submissions or protocol review. All these things, people take so much time. It's sometimes scientists, like 80% of their time is spent on reviewing and generating documents.
True.
So that's kind of one big aspect. And second, right, can I mention, like you've seen in energy or other adjacent kind of industry that are also somewhat regulated, right? They have strict kind of rubric and blueprint on how to do certain things, how to do maybe vendor document reviews, right? How do they kind of check the specs against the guidance, right? Also kind of similar to life sciences use case, right? A lot of it is checking against the standards. That's another big industry, right? Where this can really streamline the development process, or maybe even checking, let's say for construction or for architecture, right? Their drawings, right? Like in like Procore or some of the software they use against the standards to make sure, right, this thing is actually buildable, right? Like we have all the components needed. And some other industries, right, you can think about the one adjacent to life sciences, our healthcare industry, right? Let's say checking claims against policy, right? Or maybe it's for underwriting, right? That's maybe on the insurance side. A lot of it's you want to have definitely the human verification to make sure it's audit ready. But a lot of the work, right, doing analysis can be done by AI in a much faster way to help the patients, help everyone, help the hospital systems, and also help the kind of the insurance companies, right, who are kind of handling the claims. Or even you talk about kind of beyond these industries, right, like in the legal world, right, that's probably another big area where every day they're dealing with tons of evidence, right, that's coming in their way. Maybe it's for a litigation kind of case, or maybe it's for a contract law, right? They need to check if we're starting. I mean, same thing with like life sciences, right? Like signing different NDAs or CDAs, right? How do I make sure the things I sign are actually good, right? By kind of our lawyer's definition, right? Like you're paying them, let's say, maybe $250, $500 an hour just to do that type of work. But now that can be done much faster, and they can focus on the higher leverage kind of work within the company. And so all these industries, right, there are even more, they're dealing with the complex documents, and they can really benefit from this AI-driven document intelligence.
But how do you ensure accuracy, trust, and compliance when AI handles mission-critical documents?
Another great question. So what we've seen is that there are kind of two perspectives here, right? One perspective is something you've seen maybe play out in, let's say, autonomous vehicle worlds, where they're saying, as long as we are kind of better than human beings, right? If we compare them against how often humans make mistakes, right? Humans also make a lot of mistakes, right? Let's say human error rate, you can say it's like maybe 2% or 1%, right? If we can make machines kind of better than that, we're good, right? That's kind of one perspective. And today's all the benchmarks you've seen, or even we've tested kind of internally against a lot of our like clients, there are kind of internal like outputs. Like we would even catch errors that their experts cannot catch, right? Or maybe like overlooked, right, in their reviews. So that's kind of one perspective, which is basically saying we just kind of need to make sure the system is better than humans. The second perspective is also why kind of the autonomous vehicle deployments, right, have been so slow, right? Technology has always been there, but it's only kind of taken us recent years, right, that you've seen like Waymo's, right, in San Francisco, or like Tesla is actually gaining grounds. That's because we're saying it has to be almost near perfect, right? Even one single AI mistake is not tolerable, because we can't really attribute it to, okay, whose fault is this, right? It's hard to blame like on AI and say, okay, AI made the mistake. So if the drug, let's say, has some safety issues, there's no one to blame, right? It's just not possible in the current legal framework to associate the blame on an AI. So still humans' judgments are relied upon. So like that's kind of the approach we've taken with Raycaster, which is to say, just being better than humans, that's not enough. We have to make sure this is basically bulletproof, right? Like as high stakes as, I mean, indeed, right? Like people's lives are on the line, right? You just cannot truly trust that much of AI, and you have to make sure it has all the guardrails in place. So what we've done are a couple of things. One is that every kind of output we generate, right? Let's say AI makes edits on, let's say your actual CTD section, right? Your actual kind of regulatory submission. Everything can be traced back to exactly where it found the source argument and how it made that argument. And you can see exactly where in the guidelines it says things have been changed. So it gives humans as a reviewer, right, a lot more confidence to say, now for every claim or every change you're making, every value you're changing, I can cross-reference and see exactly how you got here today. So as a human, I can reproduce the results, right? Like the reproducibility is a huge kind of factor here, to basically have humans become the reviewers, right? Almost like the company's like reviewer to say, okay, I give this my final stamp of approval. So that's kind of one thing we've really invested a lot of energy in. And the second part on how we've ensured, right, like the accuracy is there and every claim is accurate, is how do you actually make the software human in the loop, right? So a lot of the AI systems you've seen, they are basically a chatbot system, right? You ask a question, it gives you an answer. You're like, okay, so what? Right? Like I still need to do maybe even more work, right, to verify your answer. So hopefully we've solved that with giving you the source materials and make it super easy for you to review. And the second part is really kind of re-architecting the system to think about, what if it's not just the chat interface, right? What if like we would pin you, right, with an email that says, here are kind of the high risk areas you should check. And actually have a review process, right, that says, okay, I'm saying like you have this title, or maybe like you worked on this document before, right? You edited this like 2 weeks ago, so you should review it. And actually the AI would just send, within a large organization, right? Let's say like thousands or even tens of thousands of people, it will find the right reviewers and pin them to say, please cross-check and reference if what I did was right. So you've seen kind of how we've changed AI from a reactive system, right? Something you have to prompt it, into a proactive system. Right now, it actually comes to you to ask you questions, right? Treat you as a colleague versus the other way around. And this is really what we think is kind of the future of work, right? Playing out, where humans and AI will collaborate on many of the mission critical industries to make advances that we've never seen before.
Okay. What are the biggest barriers to enterprise adoption of AI document platforms?
In terms of the barrier, I think there are kind of, let's say, three big components. So
Okay.
one, I would actually say it comes down to the willingness to adopt, right? Like if you've seen kind of what's being played out in public markets, where in the at least kind of in the US, I think it's kind of affecting like maybe other markets too, right? Like Europe and Asia, the stock markets, where all the SaaS companies, right? They traditionally sell software, right, to other businesses have plummeted, right? Their stock prices have lost around 30 to 50% or even more. And this is largely due to the AI fear, right? That it's going to make software obsolete, right? If developers they can just ask the AI to build the software, right? Then why would they even buy, let's say, Zoom, right? Why would they even buy like whatever software you use to make your job better?
Right.
And so that kind of has pushed basically every single company to say, okay, what is our AI strategy, right? What should we do about AI? And so they kind of start a panic, right? But then like you've seen kind of they have different kind of risk tolerance, right? Like with kind of the level of panic they're having. And so some companies, they maybe feel like their industry is more secure, right? I would say kind of, at least in the biopharma world, right? I've seen this perspective. They're like, at least, okay, AI can't do the real scientist work, right? They can't run experiments. They can't design experiments. A lot of things that require physical work, they just can't do yet, right? So we are safe. We don't have to worry about the AI risk. Whereas other people, right? Let's say you have people who work with documents, right? Or maybe anything that's purely digital, and they're like, now we have to change, right? We know this is coming because our work basically lives on the computer. Everything that lives on a computer, if you don't kind of interact with the physical world, or maybe you have a lot of your job is talking to people, then it's really hard to say AI is not going to kind of take over a lot of the work that you do. So I would say kind of in terms of the enterprise adoption, right? Like one big part is really that willingness, right? To say how kind of AI ready we are, right? And how much of the work that we do can be enhanced or rethought with a AI first approach, right? Where maybe AI generates the first draft, AI does any kind of the document review and sends you a quick feedback. If we move to that world, what would happen? So leaders kind of need to think about that problem more fundamentally and just kind of try things right on their own versus kind of being on a high pedestal and thinking about what's possible and just letting other people figure it out until they're willing to try. And then 2 and 3, right? I would say like comes down to kind of maybe your traditional talk on security, compliance, right? Like how can we audit, right? Is AI a black box, right? That's kind of the typical claim. Basically, oh, what if AI just deletes our entire system, right? Like that you kind of the Black Mirror episodes, or maybe the doomsday scenario of what if it just takes over a lot of the computers, right? Then like run woke, right? Or like amok, then it's hard to control. And so we've added a lot of provenance and auditability, right? So that every change the AI makes, you have to approve it. Or maybe even if you let it kind of make changes, it's easily recoverable, right? So any kind of the change it makes is auditable both to regulators and also internally, right? And also let you be in the controller's seat to handle any of the implications. And so kind of out of all these, right, kind of the willingness to try, compliance, and lastly, I would say is kind of really just that fear of leaking out kind of IP, right? So really need to figure out security, right? How can you make sure you have the team that guards against like AI prompt engineering, right? Or maybe kind of what if the data is leaked, right, out of from the prompt system that you built? A lot of the implications from building this AI native system, right? Like these are the real adoption kind of barriers today.
Okay. How do you balance the product innovation with the customer specific customization?
I think this is a good one because you, in a sense, you could say if we truly believe AI is really good at coding, right, which it is today, then what that means is for a lot of the customer feedbacks, instead of saying, okay, we cannot build this, you can actually build this, right? It's more of a problem of how we think the future of software is going to evolve, right? We think in large parts, the future of software is going to be malleable, right? Every company, you're going to have something that's personalized to you. That's just for sure it's going to happen because you have your specific kind of software layers. Maybe you have specific context and documents and your processes that should ideally be encoded into the software, right? To make your lives better. So we've taken kind of a lot of the customer feedback as how can we make this software so personalized to your firm, but also make sure, right, like there is a general version, right, but then it can iterate based on that and adapt to each customer's journey so that eventually everyone has their own piece of Raycaster, right, that they feel like this is something that's unique to me. I've kind of curated and crafted this software together with Raycaster for many years, right? Like I'm talking about many years later. And then they feel like this is something that's so core to their business, right? It understands all the context and it has basically their knowledge of the entire company, right? That's built up over the years. And it understands the way it does things, right? Maybe for certain types of reviews, it uses email, right? Maybe for other types, it actually sends you a text message, right, for you to reply to. Like it can go really, really personalized to the company level to a point where the software is not just general SaaS, right? You log in and then you buy the software, but something you kind of have to work out over the years with the company.
Okay. What does ROI look like when companies modernize document-heavy operations?
So there are two types of kind of ROIs that we usually talk to customers about. One is the immediate ROIs, right? So this is, let's say, their use case is document review, right? Then by adopting Raycaster or any kind of the document AI system, they're able to cut manual works from, let's say, a day of manual work, right? 8 hours of manual review into 20 minutes with Raycaster. And that kind of reduction from hours to minutes, right, is really immediate, right? It frees up, let's say, in some industry, their engineers' time, in biopharma worlds, right, your scientists' time, right, your SME, and even kind of the regulatory people, right, they can focus on maybe more on the regulatory strategy, right? Like not necessarily just the document review and making sure values are consistent. So they can kind of move to this higher level of something that requires a lot of human thinking and judgment. And that's something we've seen, right? Just one on the immediate impact. And then two is almost the secondary impact, which we've seen has played out in many cases. One is that actually having a system that understands your, let's say, regulatory strategy or maybe all your documents has a lot of value to basically all the functions, right? So we've seen the adoption typically go from one organization, like one part of the organization, into the entire organization, into, let's say, their legal department, right? They realize, okay, we can do this much faster for NDA or like CDA or for generating contracts. Or maybe this is for their actual kind of R&D scientists, right? They're talking about, we want to make some statistical analysis and we have all these internal documents. How can we reason about it, right? Maybe for them, it's about like writing different kind of daily like lab work review, right? Lab reports, SOP, different documents. So we've seen really for every kind of department, every industry, right? Like they start to come up with the use cases after they've seen the initial adoption. And so the eventual second order effect is the company is built much leaner, right? They're able to run much faster with their knowledge being kind of the most important thing that powers the company's progress over the years.
Okay. As an angel investor, what patterns do you look for in an early stage AI founders?
Yeah, so you kind of notice, like I've also been doing investing since, let's say, kind of 2020, right? Like when I already had some kind of startup experience and big tech company experience. Felt like my kind of product knowledge, right? At the time, I was a product manager at Uber, could really help founders, right, with a lot of the go-to-markets thinking, the products they're building. And so when it comes to how I think about founders, right, because they come in as an angel, so it really comes down to people. I would say like I kind of understand the ideas might change, right? And usually it's only going to grow, let's say, into something that you've never thought about before, right? When we started the company, we didn't think document would be so core to our business, right? We were so focused on, let's say, life sciences, but then eventually we realized like that's, you know, your start to expand the mission as you work in a company. So one, right, like really care about the people, the founders I invest, right? And so what that means is, are they curious people, right? Like, are they always kind of trying to learn new things? How do they talk? How do they ask questions, right? Because by the way they ask questions, you can try to figure out, are they good listeners, right? Are they going to listen to the market feedback, customer feedback, while still having their perspectives on how the market should change? And then two, I would say, especially in this AI-driven world, building a company, it's almost like even if you're not building an AI product, you have to think about how you can use AI internally, right? So I definitely care a lot about like whether they have the AI acumen, right? Let's say if they build any kind of software company, then you just have to use AI in the right way, right? Are you deploying the resources in the right way? Are you hiring the people with the right capabilities? That's kind of the thing I look for in their just overall AI awareness, right? Because if you don't use AI to build the software and you're building software, right, you're going to be like left behind very quickly. And lastly, I would say is like these days start to care a lot more, especially I'm a founder myself, how well you can hire, you can put together a team, right? Because hiring is such a critical part of building a successful business. You cannot do this alone, right? It's just impossible to build a successful company with just yourself. So like your ability to attract talent just speaks volumes about how far the company can go. So like the ability to hire is the third trait I look for.
Okay. What mistakes do technical founders commonly make when scaling a enterprise products?
I think one big mistake, and I definitely made this mistake when I started the company, which is focusing too much on the product. I would say, especially in the enterprise world, I mean, maybe even the consumer world as well. Like you would think that people care about your product, but then the reality is that you care about the product more than anyone else, right?
That's
Like
true.
everyone else, they like maybe they like briefly check your website. That's already a huge plus, right? In the enterprise setting. Maybe they read about the white paper you sent, but their time is so limited, right? Like every day they think about their work. You only factor into, let's say, not even 1 to 5% of their time or their mental kind of space. So it's more about kind of how you present, right? Like the products and distribution, right? By that, I mean, how are you going to let's say, one customer who know about you suddenly spread to 10 customers, right? And ideally to then 100. That motion is more important than if you have the best product or not. And you've seen this kind of play out repeatedly, right? You can have a worse product to start, right? Maybe I use the example of many years ago, right? When the software Slack, right? It was taking off, right? Like Slack is kind of for collaboration, right? For team communication. But then today, right? Microsoft Teams is still the most widely used collaboration software. And that's because Microsoft, even though they had a worse product for many years, right? Slack was kind of catering to companies like in the Silicon Valley, right? Who are like small and nimble, right? They're technical, they know how to build integrations. But then eventually Microsoft, right? They're going to catch up on the capabilities. But because they have such a distribution advantage, they can just bundle the software to say anyone who use Office Suite, right? You can send like documents to each other via Teams, right? Let's say when you have a meeting, you just want to talk to each other, start a group chat. It's all like through Teams, right? People are just going to start using it because they live and breathe in Microsoft Word ecosystem. And so that's kind of something I think technical founders usually make, right? They think about how do I make the best product ever? But in reality, maybe the question should be how should you get people to learn about a product much faster?
Okay. Interesting. Good to know. In what ways has your experience as an investor shaped your leadership approach as a CEO?
That's a very interesting question. I think kind of maybe one thing on being an investor is it makes you in general a more curious person, right? Like meaning someone can talk to me about robotics, right? Like something I may not be an expert on. But then I can quickly figure out how do I like become a semi-expert, or at least I know who are the experts to ask for their opinions. And this is extremely like important in the business world because things are changing so rapidly, right? For example, today we might be majorly kind of like majorly serving biopharma customers. But as I mentioned, we're expanding to other industries very quickly. So if I only focus on biopharma, right, I only have the lingo to talk about like tech transfer or like CMC, then I wouldn't be a fast learner, right? I wouldn't learn about the actual lingo they're using in energy world, right? Like let's say for coding, for compliance, what are the terminologies, right, they use to describe certain things. So being like an investor actually helps me figure out how to learn about any topic in a very quick way and then be able to confidently talk about it. And then two, I would say it's like being on the other side actually makes you more introspective, right? So because you're so involved in the company, you're thinking about it day to day, you don't have the distance to take a step back and say, wait a minute, right? Are we doing this in the right way, right? Are we going in the right direction? But being an investor sometimes make me think, okay, if I were to evaluate my company critically, right, which stage am I at, right? What are the mistakes I'm making that I wasn't aware of, that I should be aware of? So these two things are extremely helpful when it comes to managing a company.
Okay. Over the next 5 to 10 years, how will AI redefine knowledge work centered around documents?
I think my personal prediction is that everyone today, right, you basically have, let's say, a laptop, right, that you do work, right, or maybe computer if you go into the system, and that's kind of the standard, right, for all like knowledge work. But in the immediate future, you will actually have multiple personal laptops in the clouds that do the work for you. So to kind of make this more concrete, let's say your job is to review, let's say, certain parts like module 3 of the CTD section, right? You're like an independent consultant. We work with a lot of them at Raycaster. And then you work with a couple of different biopharma clients to help them review their kind of module 3 and get ready for submission. In the future, while you're sleeping, your kind of personal AI system is doing all the analysis in the cloud and not on your computer and across all the clients you have, so that when you wake up, it shows you a clean kind of report of what are the things that you need to work on today. So that's kind of where I'm seeing like a lot of the knowledge work, the future work we're talking about will be this human and AI combined workforce where humans are involved when needed, right? And AI are doing the work kind of most of the time. And it kind of comes in loop, right? And you can have both work in parallel on certain tasks and critique each other, just like how I think today maybe the ideal world of like an in-office work is, right? People sit across from each other. If you have a question, I can just walk to your desk and ask you questions, right? So it's going to be like that with AI being a core part of your kind of colleague network.
Okay. So, what industries are most at risk if they don't adopt AI for document intelligence?
I would say like I mean, like, of course, like the at-risk part needs to be like reframed, right? As people need to kind of relearn and adapt so that they can upskill themselves, right, to be ready for this AI native wave that's coming. Like really, you kind of seeing this analysis, right? Like I'm not the only one, right? Anthropic recently made a kind of AI economic report that talks about capability wise, a lot of the industries that I mentioned, right, like legal, investment banking, and also let's say management consulting, right? These are three areas that are kind of very much at risk, right, in terms of they deal with so many documents, and their work actually is a perfect example of knowledge work, right? Things that are entirely on the laptop, right? That you can basically do the work with like a computer. And that type of work, basically, AI can do sometimes much better job than humans in a much faster way, right? Make fewer mistakes. And at the same time, right, you kind of see this play out how it's always going to be more nuanced, right? Like even if the capability wise, it's going to be there, but what about let's say humans that now can do the review, right? Humans maybe can become the boss now, right? In the past, you would have, let's say, your analyst, right, working on things, heading to the associate, right, to do the final check. Maybe now it's like AI becoming an analyst, and then also giving the associate a report on what are the things that may need to be revised, right? So that your associate can now just review this quickly and send it back to your AI analyst to do the work. So that part of the work will always be evolving. But again, any kind of industry that touches documents, I feel like time is now to really think about what your job entails and what is your unique advantage.
Okay. Good. And finally, what advice would you give to founders in the AI infrastructure space today?
Yeah, so I'm a kind of founder myself. I feel like the advice is really on. I think a lot of people have this maybe misconception that the model layer, right? Let's say OpenAI, Anthropic, they're just going to take over all the applications, right? But I don't think that's going to happen. Like eventually, right? Even we talk about eventuality, because what we are seeing is that there's always kind of this specialty, and people like talking to people, right? Even in a world where AI does a lot of the work, I would say it wouldn't take away the human nature of relationship building and enterprise sales, and how do you kind of like invite each other to, let's say, like dinners and talk about certain topics, talk about a deal, for example. A lot of those aspects won't be kind of entirely taken away. So focus on building applications that provide a lot of immediate value, right? That's number one. And then two, have this chance of deepening human relationships. I would say that is probably a crucial lesson I've learned, right? How can we build software that actually makes people feel closer, right? Not more far away. Because like maybe one analogy I would make is that it's actually pretty lonely, right? For a lot of the work that you do, let's say for document review, you're just by yourself, right, every day, and reviewing the documents. Like one customer we work with, they have thousands of engineers whose entire job is to review the EPC, or like the energy vendor documents. That's their entire job, right? They don't really talk to anyone except for maybe their project manager. So if we can actually have AI do a lot of these work, they can actually focus on the more collaborative nature of talking to each other and helping the company maybe figure out areas to go into, right? Something that's more collaborative and deepening the human relationships. So that's kind of what I would encourage founders to think about. How can your software help us build that better future where humans are, more loving, right? More happy, and help each other to
Very
succeed.
nice. Very nice. And thanks for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. It was truly an interesting and insightful discussion. And thank you again for your time and sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sando.